The challenge begins. The imperial arena of the Zyrethian Empire was vast and shining, a place where warriors from different planets came to prove their strength. Thousands of aliens filled the stands, their voices mixing into a deep hum of excitement. High above the battlefield, banners of gold and silver swayed in the artificial wind. The Zyrethians, rulers of many worlds, watched from their grand thrones, their eyes glowing with superiority. At the center of it all stood Princess Zyra, the daughter of the High Emperor. She was tall, graceful, and proud, wearing armor made of Zyrian steel, a metal stronger than anything humans had ever seen. Her sharp silver hair shimmered under the bright arena lights, and her 4 glowing eyes studied the opponent standing before her. She smirked. Her opponent was a human. The alien crowd laughed as Commander Ethan Cole walked onto the battlefield. His heavy combat armor clanked with each step, its surface scratched from many battles. The human stood tall, his sharp green eyes calm. Unlike the Zyrethians, he only had 2 eyes, 2 arms, and 2 legs. To the aliens, he looked weak, slow, unworthy. Zyra let out a chuckle. So this is what humanity offers. Her voice rang through the arena, filled with mockery. A metal suit to hide your fragile body. The crowd erupted in laughter again. Ethan said nothing. He only adjusted the strap on his shoulder and let her talk. Zyra took a step forward, raising her plasma blade. The weapon hummed with deadly energy. You rely on that armor because you are weak. Your kind thinks metal can make up for what you lack. She tilted her head, eyes gleaming with amusement. But here, in the Zyrethian Empire, only true warriors survive. We do not hide behind shields of steel. She pointed the blade at him. I challenge you, human. But if you are as strong as you claim to be, fight me without your armor. The arena fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then whispers filled the stands, spreading like fire. No one expected this. A challenge without armor. That was a death sentence for a human. Even a Zyrethian, with their superior strength, would think twice before fighting unprotected. Their bones were thick, their muscles dense, their reflexes unmatched. But humans, they were soft, their flesh easy to cut. Zyra's blade could slice through Ethan's armor with effort. Without it, a single strike would kill him. The Zyrethian nobles leaned forward, eager to see the human panic, to watch him refuse and humiliate himself. No human would be foolish enough to accept. But then, Ethan laughed. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't forced. It was a real, honest laugh, like he had just heard the funniest joke in the galaxy. The laughter confused Zyra. Her confident smirk faded. The aliens in the audience exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan reached for the clasps of his armor. Clank. The first piece fell to the ground. Clank. The next one followed. Piece by piece, he removed his armor. A wave of gasps spread through the arena. Was he insane? He let his chest plate drop, revealing a body scared but strong. His arms were thick with muscle, his skin tough from years of war. No enhancements. No exosuit, just a man, standing alone against an alien warrior. Zyra narrowed her eyes. She had expected fear. She saw none. He rolled his shoulders, stretching as if he had just freed himself from a heavy burden. Then he grinned. Let's see what happens next. The arena was silent. Completely silent. For the first time, the Zyrethians weren't sure if they should be laughing. The fight begins. Zyra tightened her grip on the plasma blade, her 4 glowing eyes narrowing in confusion. This was not the reaction she had expected. The human should have hesitated. He should have begged to keep his armor or looked toward his superiors for permission to refuse. But instead, he stood there, calm, steady, amused. A flicker of doubt crept into her mind, but she pushed it away. This was still a battle of strength, and in that, the outcome was already decided. She lunged. The plasma blade cut through the air with a deadly hum, aimed directly at the human's exposed torso. A strike like this would have melted through his armor in seconds. Without it, he would be dead before he even felt pain. Except he wasn't there. Zyra's blade met nothing but air. The crowd gasped. Ethan had moved, but not like an alien, not with the practiced grace of Zyrethian warriors or the programmed precision of cybernetic soldiers. His movement was wild, unpredictable, something more primal. He didn't dodge in a straight line or follow a pattern. He twisted, sidestepped, ducked, a motion so fluent and natural that it was almost impossible to track. Zyra pivoted, faster this time, swinging low toward his legs. But he jumped, the blade missing him by an inch. The moment his feet touched the ground, he was already moving again. The audience, once roaring with laughter, was now silent. Zyra gritted her teeth. Enough games. She activated her exo-reflex enhancements, small neural implants embedded in her skull. Immediately, the world slowed down around her. To her enhanced senses, Ethan's movements were no longer a blur. They were readable, calculable. She lunged again, this time faster than before. Ethan stepped forward instead of backward. The move was bold, reckless, even suicidal. No unarmored being would willingly close the gap in a fight like this. But just before her blade reached him, he ducked under her arm, using her momentum against her. Zyra felt the air shift, then a sharp impact against her ribs. For the first time in her life, she stumbled. She barely caught herself, her boots sliding against the smooth arena floor. Pain pulsed through her side, but worse than that was the realization that she had just been hit by a human. Ethan stood a few steps away now, completely unarmed, smirking. "You rely on speed," he said, rolling his shoulders as if warming up. "That's cute." Zyra's eyes burned with fury. No one had ever mocked her in the arena. No one had ever dared to fight her without armor. She had trained since birth, fought, and defeated warriors from the strongest species in the galaxy. And yet, this human had just landed a strike on her. It was impossible. It was insulting. "You got lucky," she hissed. "It won't happen again." Ethan tilted his head, still smirking. "You sure about that?" The confidence in his voice sent a ripple through the arena. The audience, once filled with certainty that this would be an effortless victory for their princess, now found themselves watching with unease. Something wasn't right. Something about the human wasn't normal. Zyra clenched her fists. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was about pride. She would end this. Now. With a battle cry, she charged forward at full speed. But Ethan just stood there, waiting. And for the first time, Zyra felt something she had never felt before. Doubt. The science of strength. Zyra clenched her teeth, forcing her mind to silence the creeping doubt. No, this was still her fight. She was stronger, faster, superior. The idea that a human, a species known for their fragile bodies and primitive weapons, could challenge her was absurd. It was impossible. Yet, her ribs still ached from the strike Ethan had landed. With a sharp exhale, she rushed forward, her plasma blade glowing bright as she swung it in a vicious arc. This time, she wasn't testing him. She was aiming to end it. The blade sliced through the air, perfect in speed and precision. No living being could escape this. But then, he moved again. Not in a predictable way, not in the way her mind had trained to expect. It was different from any fighting style she had ever studied. Humans, she had been told, were slow. Their reflexes were nothing compared to Zyrethians, who had centuries of genetic enhancements and biomechanical perfection. And yet, Ethan was ahead of her. He stepped into the attack, not away from it, his body tilting at an angle that made the blade miss his shoulder by a fraction of an inch. He should have been cut. The plasma should have burned his flesh. But instead, the edge of the blade merely sliced a single strand of his dark hair. Before she could recover, his arm shot forward. It wasn't a punch, it was a strike. Precise, calculated, deadly. Ethan's fingers struck a nerve cluster just below her collarbone. An attack that no one should have known about. Thyra gasped, her muscles freezing for a split second. A human had just paralyzed a part of her body with nothing but a well-placed touch. Impossible. She forced herself back, retreating a few steps, shaking off the strange numbness in her shoulder. Her breathing was heavier now, not from exhaustion, but from something far worse. Confusion. Ethan rolled his shoulders, completely unarmed, standing there like he wasn't fighting a superior warrior from one of the most advanced empires in the galaxy. "You rely too much on your enhancements," he said casually, as if explaining a simple fact. "That's why you're losing." Losing. The word burned in Thyra's mind. She wasn't losing. She couldn't be. She had trained since childhood in every known form of combat. She had fought cyborgs, war beasts, and creatures that could crush starships with their bare hands. Yet this human was dodging her attacks like he had read the script beforehand. Her jaw clenched. "You think you're faster than me," she hissed. Ethan shook his head. "No, you're faster than me." He tilted his head, watching her with a look that made her stomach twist, like he was waiting for her to understand something. But speed doesn't win fights. Adaptation does. Sarah gripped her weapon tighter, her mind racing. Adaptation. Her species didn't need adaptation. Zarethians were born superior, built through generations of genetic perfection. They didn't need to change because they were already the strongest. But humans had no choice but to adapt. A distant memory surfaced in Thyra's mind, a report from one of the Zarethian war generals about human soldiers on a battlefield. It wasn't their technology that made them dangerous. It wasn't their weapons or numbers. It was something far worse. They learned. She felt her fingers tremble slightly against the hilt of her weapon. It wasn't fear. It couldn't be. But as she watched Ethan analyzing her, waiting, calculating his next move, something in her instincts screamed a warning. This fight wasn't about strength. It wasn't about speed. It was about who would learn faster. And for the first time, Thyra wasn't sure if she was the one winning. The unthinkable happens. Thyra's heart pounded, but not from exertion. No, this was something else. Something she had never felt before in combat. A pressure. A tension she couldn't quite name. It coiled around her thoughts, whispering the one thing her pride refused to accept. She was being outmatched. By a human. She tightened her grip on the plasma blade, willing the doubt away. This was still her fight. She was still the superior warrior. She just needed to end it. Zira activated the full power of her combat suit. The energy coursed through her veins like liquid fire. The neural implants connected directly to her muscles, enhancing her reflexes beyond what nature had given her. Time slowed. The battlefield became a series of calculated movements and predictions. No one had ever survived against her at this level. Ethan stood still, watching her, calm as ever. That smirk was still there. That infuriating, unreadable smirk. She lunged. Faster than before, her plasma blade a streak of pure energy. She was faster than light itself. No human should have been able to react. But Ethan moved before she even struck. Not after. Before. Thyra felt her stomach twist. He sidestepped at the perfect moment, like he knew exactly where her blade would be. Like he had already played this fight out in his mind, and was simply walking through the steps. Her blade hit nothing but air. Again. Impossible. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. She was at maximum speed. This was beyond what a human should be capable of. And then, he struck. Not with a weapon. Not with enhancements. With a simple, well-placed hit. Ethan's fist slammed into her exposed ribs with the force of a hammer, knocking the air from her lungs. Thyra staggered backward, her vision swimming. Pain exploded through her chest, not just from the impact, but from the sheer impossibility of it. No one had ever hit her like that before. Her armor should have absorbed the damage. Her enhancements should have let her counter before the blow landed. And yet, he had broken through it all. The crowd, once roaring with confidence in their princess, was silent. They had just witnessed something unthinkable. A human, unarmored, unenhanced, had just outmaneuvered a genetically perfected warrior. Zaira clenched her fists. No, no, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. She roared and activated her final enhancement. Her suit's overdrive mode kicked in, sending an electrified surge through her nerves. Her muscles tensed, reinforced by the synthetic fibers of her combat gear. Every motion, every reaction became 10 times faster. This time, she wouldn't miss. She launched herself forward with a speed that shattered the ground beneath her. Ethan didn't flinch. He just waited. Then, at the last possible second, he shifted. It wasn't a dodge. It was something far worse. He sidestepped with perfect timing, letting her own momentum betray her. Her body surged forward, too fast to stop, too powerful to control, and she felt it before she even saw it. His foot hooked behind her ankle. A simple trip. A basic, almost mocking maneuver. And yet, with all her speed, all her power, it was devastating. Zaira lost her balance. The moment stretched in her mind, agonizingly slow. The realization burned through her pride as she fell forward, completely exposed. Then, Ethan struck. A precise, controlled impact against her backplate's weak point. The world twisted, flipped, and then she crashed into the ground. The impact shook the arena. Dust and debris scattered through the air. The princess of the Zyrethian Empire, undefeated, feared, untouchable, was lying on the ground at the feet of a human. The silence was deafening. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't gloat. He didn't even look surprised. He simply stood there, watching her as if he had expected this outcome all along. Zaira's fingers dug into the dirt. Her body trembled, not from pain, but from something far worse. Humiliation. For the first time in her life, she had lost. And the entire galaxy had just watched it happen. Humanity's hidden strength. Zaira lay in the dirt, her body frozen, not from pain, but from something far worse. Disbelief. Her mind raced, desperate to rationalize what had just happened. She was the strongest, the fastest, the superior warrior. Her combat enhancements had made her untouchable, her suit crafted from the finest technology in the Zyrethian Empire. And yet, a human had beaten her. The weight of the realization pressed down on her, heavier than any physical wound. How? A shadow fell over her. She looked up, her breath uneven, only to see Ethan standing above her. There was no mockery in his expression, no arrogance, just the same calm, unreadable confidence he had carried since the start of this battle. That made it worse. If he had gloated, if he had laughed, she could have hated him. But instead, he only studied her as if she was a puzzle he had already solved. With a slow, deliberate movement, he extended a hand toward her. The simple gesture sent a ripple through the crowd. Gasps, murmurs, whispers of confusion. A Zyrethian warrior, a princess, had been offered help from an unarmored human. The very idea was unthinkable. Zaira stared at his hand, her pride screaming at her to refuse, to push herself up, to stand without assistance, to pretend as if this fight had meant nothing. But deep down she knew. It had meant everything. Swallowing hard, she reached out and gripped his hand. The moment their palms met, the arena erupted. Not with cheers, not with applause, with silence. A silence louder than any roar. Zaira pulled herself to her feet, her body aching, her mind struggling to process what she had just done. She had accepted a human's help. No, it was more than that. She had accepted his victory. Ethan stepped back, watching her with that same unwavering gaze. Then, as if nothing had happened, he spoke. "You rely too much on your technology," he said simply. The words struck harder than his fists. Zaira clenched her jaw, anger flashing in her 4 eyes. "You think we are weak," she hissed. Ethan shook his head. "No, you're strong, but not in the way you think." His gaze drifted across the silent crowd, thousands of Zarathians watching, waiting. Then he turned back to her. You were born into strength, he continued. Your empire made you powerful. Your enhancements, your weapons, your training, they all shaped you into what you are. Zyra's fingers curled into fists. She wanted to argue, to deny it. But something in his voice, something unsettlingly true, kept her silent. Ethan took a step closer. His tone was calm, but beneath it, there was an edge, a quiet, terrifying truth. Humans don't get that luxury, he said. We weren't born strong. We weren't given enhancements. We weren't handed an empire. His expression hardened. We had to build our strength from nothing. Zyra's pulse quickened. Every war we fought, Ethan continued, every challenge we faced, we adapted, we learned, we pushed past our limits, again and again, because we had no other choice. His voice lowered, but the weight of his words only grew heavier. And that's why you lost. Zyra's breath caught. You don't know how to fight without your enhancements, Ethan said, because you've never needed to. The realization slammed into her harder than his attacks. He was right. Her entire life, she had trained with the best weapons, the best technology, the best genetic modifications. She had never fought without them, because she had never needed to. But Ethan, he had stripped away everything. His armor, his weapons, everything but himself. And he had still won. Her pride hated the truth, but her warrior's heart recognized it. For the first time, she looked at the human, not as an inferior being, not as a primitive creature, but as something far more dangerous. Not because of his strength, because of what humanity was capable of. Zyra slowly exhaled, forcing herself to meet his gaze. You adapt, she said softly. The word felt strange on her tongue. Ethan gave a slight nod. It's what we do best. A shiver ran through her spine, not from fear, but from something she had never felt before when facing another warrior. Uncertainty. She had thought her people understood humanity, that their empire, their warriors, their scholars had studied them enough to know their limits. Now she wasn't sure if humans had any. The thought was terrifying. The ultimate defeat. Zyra stood frozen, her breath unsteady. The weight of Ethan's words lingered, pressing down on her pride like an unshakable force. Her fingers twitched at her sides, every instinct screaming at her to deny the truth. But she couldn't. She had felt it with her own body. She had seen it with her own eyes. And now, the entire Zyrathian Empire had seen it too. Still, a fire burned inside her. This wasn't over. Her pride, her warrior's spirit, refused to accept that she, a princess of the Zyrathian Empire, trained from birth to be superior, could lose to an unarmored human. Not like this. Her legs ached, her ribs throbbed, but she ignored the pain. Without a word, she dropped into a fighting stance again. The arena, already silent, became even still. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. He didn't move, didn't prepare to strike. Instead, he studied her like a teacher watching a stubborn student. You still don't get it, do you? He said quietly. Zyra ignored him. With a sharp breath, she launched forward, striking with every ounce of strength she had left. Ethan did not dodge. Instead, he caught her wrist. The moment their skin met, something shifted. Zyra felt it. It wasn't just a block. It wasn't just a counter. It was control. Ethan's grip was firm, but not crushing. He had moved before she even completed her attack, turning her momentum against her in a way she couldn't break free from. Her breath hitched. He was faster, not in speed, but in decision, in understanding. And that was far, far worse. Ethan twisted, and before she could react, he pulled her arm just enough to throw her off balance. Her feet left the ground for a split second, a single, devastating second. Then, with nothing more than a calculated shift in weight, he sent her crashing to the ground. Not with brute force, Not with superior strength, with perfect, effortless technique. Zira gasped as the impact stole the air from her lungs. She tried to move, to push herself up, but Ethan was already standing over her. Not even out of breath. Not even sweating. Like this fight had never been a challenge to him at all. Zyra's heart pounded. This was real. She had lost again. The shocking consequences. Zyra's fingers twitched. Dust clung to her skin, her armor scratched and battered. Not from plasma fire, not from energy weapons, but from the hands of an unarmored human. Her pride screamed at her to refuse, to rise on her own, to pretend that this defeat meant nothing. But it did. It meant everything. The crowd, the thousands of Zarethians who had once laughed, stood in absolute silence. There were no cheers, no jeers, no chants of victory. Only the cold, unnerving stillness of a people confronted with something they did not understand, something they had never understood. Zyra swallowed hard. Then she took his hand. Gasps rippled through the arena, not just from the commoners in the stands, but from the nobles, the high-ranking warlords, the scholars and tacticians of the Zarethian Empire, because no Zarethian had ever done what she had just done. Zyra rose to her feet, gripping Ethan's hand for just a moment longer than necessary. His touch was warm, steady, real. There were no cybernetic enhancements beneath his skin, no artificial reinforcements, just flesh, blood, and bone. And yet, he had broken her. She met his gaze, searching for something. Weakness, hesitation, arrogance. She found none. Ethan simply nodded, as if he had already known this would happen, as if this wasn't some grand victory to him, but something inevitable. That scared her more than anything else. A slow, deliberate movement caught her eye. From the high balcony of the imperial throne, the emperor himself, her father, stood, his 4 glowing eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. Around him, the royal court watched, their faces pale, their once surety shattered. They had called humans weak. But now, every Zarethian in the Empire had seen the truth. The human had never been weak. They had simply been underestimated. A shift rippled through the Empire at that moment, silent yet undeniable. The realization that humanity was not prey. They were not servants. They were not conquerable. They were something far, far worse. They were rivals. Zyra released Ethan's hand and took a slow step back, her heart hammering in her chest. She had always believed her people were the pinnacle of evolution, that they had reached the peak of power. But humans grew. They adapted. They changed. And that made them more dangerous than any species in the known galaxy. A movement from the royal balcony caught her attention. Her father, the High Emperor of the Zarethian Empire, raised a single hand. His expression remained unreadable, his golden robes unmoving even in the artificial wind of the arena. Then, in a motion that had never been seen before in Zarethian history, he bowed. It wasn't a deep bow. It wasn't an act of submission, but it was a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect, of fear. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs, warriors and nobles exchanging frantic whispers. Never had a Zarethian emperor bowed to anyone, especially not a human. Ethan remained still. He had expected resistance, maybe hostility. But this was the moment everything changed. The galactic order, the delicate balance of power that had once been controlled by the great empires, had just shifted. The Zarethians had ruled for centuries, unchallenged, certain of their dominance. But now, they had seen what a single unarmed human could do. And they understood. Earth was no longer just another backwater planet. Humanity was no longer just another species. They were something new, something unpredictable, something that could not be stopped. Shira exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders. The first time she had looked at Ethan, she had seen nothing more than a lesser being in crude armor. Now, when she looked at him, she saw the future, and it terrified her. She met his gaze one last time, her voice steady despite the chaos unraveling around them. "This isn't over." Ethan's smirk returned, but this time it wasn't arrogance, it was understanding. "It never is," he said. And with that, the battle was over. But the war was just beginning.